The central dogma of biology is that DNA turns into RNA, which turns into protein. I have said this over and over and over again because it's fundamental to our understanding of biology. But is it all a lie? Are we scientists liars? Kind of, yeah. It's kind of like when you were a child and you went to your parents and you were like, how are babies made? And then they said, when a man and a woman love each other very much, they come together and have a baby. And then, you know, on the school bus or on the internet where we get this type of information, we learn that the process is a little bit more complicated than that. Scientists, we kind of do the same thing. We simplify something in order to not blow your mind when you're 5 years old. DNA turns into RNA, right? This process is called transcription. It is highly regulated and clearly very important for everything that turns into protein. But this only happens for genes, guys. Do you want to know how much of our DNA is made up of genes? 1.2%. 1.2%. The other 98.8% of our DNA is for regulating those genes or maintaining the integrity of the DNA. But you know, that 1.2%, right? It gets turned from DNA into RNA into protein, but do they? Let me put this in perspective. Every cell in your body, your skin cells, your muscle cells, your brain cells, every cell in your body has the exact same DNA, the exact same genes. But why are they so different? Well, because not all of them use the same genes. Skin cells have genes that become activated in order to tell them to be skin, whereas muscle cells have genes that become activated in order to tell them to be muscle. Every other part of that DNA gets silenced because you don't want that expressed. You don't want your cell to be confused about whether or not it's skin or muscle because you're not going to have skin. Let me give you a big example of this. This is X inactivation. What is X inactivation? In order to determine our genetic sex, this happens through chromosomes called the X and Y chromosomes. Females have 2 X chromosomes. Males have 1 X and 1 Y, genetically speaking, of course. Within every cell, you only need 1 X chromosome. And in fact, you need just one. If the second one is active, that cell would die. So within a female, every cell in our body shuts down one of those X's. And it's not the same one. Have you ever noticed how calico cats are only female? That coloration on their back comes from X inactivation. Within the orange region, you have 1 X active. Within the black region, you have another X active. That's one example of an entire chromosome being silenced. But within every cell of our body, you have an extensive level of silencing of most genes in order to express only what you need within those cells. Okay. So, right, DNA doesn't always turn into RNA. But if it turns into RNA, it must at that point be needed to turn into protein, right? Because protein are the ones that perform the actions. No. When we look at things in research, a lot of times we'll see a change in RNA, and that could be like a 3 or 5 times level of change in RNA. But when you look at the change in protein, it is nowhere near that level. And that's partly because RNA is highly unstable. RNA gets degraded a lot before it ever gets turned into protein. There are these enzymes called RNases. They're just running around chomping up all the RNAs. And they are everywhere. They're in your saliva, they're in the air. If you touch something, if I touch this shirt, there's probably RNases there. Well, why? Why do we have RNases that are killing all of our RNAs before they get turned into protein? One reason is because you need a really fast response. So let's take the stress response. Our bodies can receive stress, right? But cells can also receive stress individually. Now, when they receive that stress, you want the response to stress to happen very fast. Now, you don't necessarily want to go from DNA into RNA and that RNA to be carried to wherever it needs to be in the cell and then turned into protein. It would be way faster just to have the RNA already there and that get turned into protein instantly. But you don't want it active all of the time. If you had these things active in stress response all of the time, it could very easily lead to cell death. All right, well, RNA doesn't necessarily get turned into protein, but it is required in order for the action of the protein. There are RNAs that do their own thing. Most of these are small RNAs. They are microRNAs, piRNAs, tRNAs, rRNAs. There's also a group called ribozymes, which are RNA enzymes. And each of these perform their actions as RNAs. They do not ever get turned into protein. Now, when it happens, when DNA gets turned into RNA and that gets turned into protein, it is beautiful, right? That's most of what scientists study. But most of the time, it doesn't happen. The central dogma is a lie for at least 98.8% of our DNA. But, for that 1.2%, also probably 98% of the time doesn't happen, but that's okay. For that 1% of 1%, that's when it's happening. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.